In a kingdom nestled between sprawling meadows and shadowy woods, Cinderella lived a life of quiet resilience. By day, she toiled under the watchful eyes of her cruel stepmother and stepsisters, her hands raw from scrubbing floors and her back aching from endless chores. But at night, she found solace beneath the vast sky, her gaze fixed on the moon, dreaming of freedom. One fateful evening, as the silver moon bathed the land in its glow, Cinderella stole away into the woods for a moment of peace. The forest felt alive, its branches swaying gently as if whispering secrets. She wandered deeper than ever before, drawn by the sound of a distant, haunting melody, part song, part howl. "Who's there?" she called, her voice trembling yet curious. From the shadows emerged a figure, tall and cloaked, with striking golden eyes that caught the moonlight. His features were rugged but kind, his posture hesitant as if unsure whether to step forward or retreat. "I mean you no harm," the figure said, his voice deep and soothing. "I didn't expect anyone to be this far into the woods." "I could say the same to you," Cinderella replied, clutching her cloak tightly. "Who are you?" The figure hesitated before replying. "My name is Alaric. I prefer the quiet of the forest." Cinderella's brow furrowed, intrigued by his mysterious aura. "And what are you doing out here?" Alaric looked away, his gaze fixated on the glowing full moon. "Sometimes, the forest is the only place where one can truly be themselves." Though his words were cryptic, Cinderella sensed a loneliness in him that mirrored her own. The two began to talk, their conversation flowing as naturally as the brook nearby. For the first time in years, Cinderella felt heard, seen, understood. But as the hours passed and the moon climbed higher, Alaric grew restless, his body tense. "You should go," he said suddenly, his tone urgent. "What's wrong?" Cinderella asked, stepping closer. "I can't stay, just trust me." Alaric's voice cracked as he backed away, retreating into the shadows. Cinderella watched him vanish, her heart heavy with questions. She didn't know it then, but Alaric carried a secret, a curse tied to the moon that would soon intertwine their fates in ways neither could imagine. The night of the grand royal ball arrived, an event every maiden in the kingdom longed to attend. Cinderella's stepsisters spent hours preening, their laughter and cruel taunts echoing through the manor. Cinderella busied herself preparing their dresses, all the while concealing her yearning for a chance to escape, to dance, to be free. As the clock chimed 7, her stepsisters departed in a flurry of silks and perfumes, leaving Cinderella alone in the dimly lit kitchen. She sat by the hearth, staring at the flickering flames, when a sudden breeze swept through the room. It carried with it the scent of roses and pine. "Dreaming of the ball?" a familiar voice asked. Cinderella gasped, turning to find her fairy godmother standing there, a vision of grace with sparkling wings and a kind smile. "I cannot grant you freedom from your troubles, my dear," the godmother said, "but tonight, I can give you a chance to experience the world as it should be." With a flick of her wand, the tattered rags Cinderella wore transformed into a breathtaking gown of silver and midnight blue, shimmering as if woven from moonlight itself. A delicate mask appeared in her hands, intricate and glittering like stardust. "But why the mask?" Cinderella asked, her voice laced with curiosity. "Because tonight, you will not be just Cinderella. You will be whoever you wish to be." The godmother's final gift was a carriage made from an enchanted pumpkin and horses conjured from mice. As Cinderella climbed inside, the godmother warned her, "The magic will fade at midnight. Be cautious, and trust your instincts." At the castle, Cinderella's entrance was like a dream. The grand ballroom sparkled with chandeliers, laughter, and music, but it was her arrival that turned every head. Whispers filled the room as she descended the staircase, her gown trailing like a waterfall of stars. As she mingled, her heart fluttered with joy. But then she saw him, Alaric. He stood apart from the crowd, wearing a dark mask that only emphasized his piercing golden eyes. His presence, commanding yet solitary, sent a chill down her spine. "Cinderella," he whispered when she approached. "How do you know me?" she asked, her eyes narrowing. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low and urgent. But before she could reply, the prince himself interrupted, bowing gracefully and asking for a dance. Alaric's jaw tightened as Cinderella accepted, his gaze following her as she moved across the floor with the prince. Every moment of the dance felt like a dream to Cinderella, yet her mind kept drifting to Alaric. Something about his warning unsettled her. As the prince spun her under the glittering chandeliers, she couldn't shake the feeling that Alaric's shadow loomed over her happiness. From the corner of the room, Alaric clenched his fists, the moonlight streaming through the high windows seeming to pull at him. His curse, the beast within him, stirred restlessly. He knew he had to protect Cinderella from the truth of what he was, even if it meant keeping his distance. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, Cinderella wandered onto the palace balcony, the night air cool against her skin. She needed a moment away from the crowd to clear her thoughts. "I told you not to come," Alaric's voice said behind her, low and strained. She turned to see him standing in the shadows, his mask still concealing most of his face. "Why do you keep saying that? What are you so afraid of?" "Not what," Alaric said, stepping closer, "but who?" He removed his mask, and for the first time, Cinderella saw his face fully. His golden eyes glowed faintly, his features sharp and haunted. "I am cursed," he confessed. "Under the full moon, I become a beast. It's why I live in the forest, away from people. I never wanted you to see this part of me." Cinderella's breath hitched, but she didn't move away. Instead, she looked at him with a mix of wonder and sympathy. "You think this curse defines you, but it doesn't. You've shown me kindness, and that's who you are." Alaric's eyes softened, but before he could reply, the clock began to strike midnight. The sound reverberated through the castle, and the magic that cloaked Cinderella began to unravel. Her gown dulled, her glass slippers vanished, and her hair fell from its perfect curls. "No," she cried, turning to flee. Alaric reached for her, but the transformation shocked the crowd, drawing attention. "It's her," someone shouted. "The mysterious maiden is just a servant." Cinderella ran, her heart pounding, with Alaric chasing after her. As she reached the palace gates, her foot caught, and she stumbled, losing the silver mask. She turned to see Alaric kneeling beside her, his expression pained. "You don't have to run," he said. "I'm not running from them," she whispered. "I'm running from myself." But before she could explain, she disappeared into the night, leaving Alaric with her fallen mask. The days following the ball were a whirlwind of confusion and hurt. Cinderella returned to the mansion, her heart heavy with the memory of the mask she had left behind and the prince's confused gaze. but what lingered most was the urgency in Alaric's voice as he had chased after her. She couldn't stop thinking about him, his golden eyes, the mysterious way he carried himself, and the secret he'd entrusted her with. Was he truly cursed? Was he a beast, or was something deeper at play? In the quiet of her room, Cinderella carefully examined the mask Alaric had left behind. Its delicate gold filigree glimmered, yet it felt heavier now, as though it carried the weight of 1,000 untold stories. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden knock at the door. It was her stepsisters, their voices shrill as they demanded Cinderella's attention. They had both been enchanted by the prince's attentions at the ball, and now they were consumed with plans to win his favor. But as they jabbered on, Cinderella's mind wandered back to Alaric. The next evening, just after dusk, Cinderella found herself standing at the edge of the forest, staring at the darkened woods where Alaric had disappeared. The air was thick with mystery, and every part of her being urged her to find the truth, to uncover the pieces of the puzzle. Suddenly, a familiar figure stepped from the shadows, Alaric. His eyes were no longer just golden, but filled with sorrow and regret. "I knew you would come," he said quietly. "I tried to protect you. You deserve a life free of my curse." Cinderella shook her head. "No. You don't need to protect me. You're not the monster they might think you are." He stepped closer, the moonlight bathing him in an eerie glow. "I'm not who you think I am. But if you want to know the truth, I'll show you. But you have to trust me." Without waiting for a response, Alaric turned and led Cinderella deeper into the forest, past towering trees and winding paths. The air grew colder as they walked, and the sounds of the forest became quieter. Finally, they reached a clearing, where the full moon illuminated an ancient stone circle. "This is where it began," Alaric said, his voice trembling. He knelt down before the stone and placed his hands on the ground. "The curse was placed upon me by a sorceress many years ago. I was once a prince, living in a distant land. But my arrogance and pride led me to make enemies, and one of them cursed me to become a wolf under the full moon. The curse was tied to my heart. Only someone who truly understands both sides of me can break it." Cinderella's heart ached for him. "And you think that person is me?" she whispered. Alaric nodded slowly, his golden eyes softening. "Yes. You see, the curse binds me to my wolf form, but it also binds me to the part of me that yearns to be free. If you are willing to accept both the man and the beast, the curse will be broken." Cinderella reached out and touched his hand. "I don't know what to say, but I will stand by you." The night of the next full moon arrived, and with it, the culmination of everything Alaric had told Cinderella. She stood in the clearing once more, waiting for him. The moon hung low in the sky, its light casting a silvery sheen over the forest floor. Alaric approached, his posture tense, his eyes full of both hope and fear. "Tonight is the night, Cinderella. The moon is full, and so is the magic that binds me." Cinderella nodded, her heart racing. "I'm ready." The transformation began slowly, agonizingly. Alaric's body trembled as his human form began to twist and shift, his bones contorting, fur sprouting from his skin. He let out a low growl, his eyes turning a brilliant amber as his human features were replaced by the powerful, imposing figure of a massive wolf. Cinderella watched, her breath catching in her throat. She had heard tales of werewolves, but nothing had prepared her for the raw power that Alaric now exuded. Yet, as terrifying as he looked, she could still see the man within him, the same eyes, the same spirit. Alaric howled into the night, his voice both beautiful and haunting. The sound echoed through the trees, reaching the very heart of the forest. Cinderella stepped closer, despite the fear bubbling inside her. She wasn't afraid anymore. She trusted him. The wolf paced around her, his large form circling her like a storm. Then, as if to reassure her, he stopped and lowered his head, allowing her to gently place her hand on his fur. In that moment, something shifted. Cinderella could feel the connection between them, the magic of the moon wrapping around them both, intertwining their fates. Alaric's form began to shift again, slowly returning to his human shape. But this time, it was different. His transformation was smoother, the pain of the curse easing. When he stood before her, back in his human form, Alaric looked exhausted but elated. His golden eyes glowed with an intensity that now felt less like a curse and more like a triumph. "It's done," he said, his voice hoarse but filled with relief. "The curse is broken." The days following the breaking of the curse were unlike anything Cinderella had ever experienced. She had left behind her life of servitude and expectations, stepping into a new world where she was free to be herself. Alaric, now fully human and unburdened by his wolf form, became the person she had always hoped he could be, gentle, kind, and deeply in tune with the magic of the forest. They spent their mornings wandering through the forest, the sunlight streaming through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the ground. The air was thick with the scent of wildflowers and pine, and the songs of birds filled the space around them. There was peace here, an unfamiliar kind of peace that Cinderella had never known before. Alaric would tell her stories about his past, the land he had once ruled, the battles he had fought, the curse that had twisted his life into something dark and painful. He spoke of the sorceress who had cursed him, a powerful witch who had been envious of his kingdom's prosperity. But as he shared these stories, his eyes were filled not with regret, but with the hope that now, at last, he had found a future worth living for. One evening, as they sat beside the same stream where they had first shared their connection, Alaric turned to Cinderella, his face serious. The golden glow of the setting sun caught his features, making him appear even more regal. But there was an undeniable weight in his voice as he spoke. "Cinderella," he began, his voice low and filled with emotion. "We've been given a second chance, both of us. But there are still things we need to face. I know that the prince will come looking for you. He's bound to want to know where his mystery girl has gone, and the kingdom will expect something from you. You're a lady of great beauty, and your stepsisters will undoubtedly be searching for the spotlight. You have a future beyond this place, and I would never want to hold you back." Cinderella listened intently, feeling the seriousness of his words. She had thought about this, about the world she had left behind. The prince, the grand balls, and the expectations that came with her status as a young woman of noble blood. But none of that mattered to her anymore. "I appreciate your concern," Cinderella said softly, her voice steady. "But I've already made my choice. The world I once lived in feels so distant now. It was never really mine. I belong here, with you, in this wild place where we can be free, without the weight of society's gaze. You don't need to worry about me going back to that life. I've found my true home." Alaric's golden eyes softened, the vulnerability in them raw and undeniable. He reached out, cupping her face in his hands as he looked deeply into her eyes. "You've made my heart whole, Cinderella. But there's something I've been keeping from you. Something important." Cinderella raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. "What is it?" Alaric hesitated for a moment, and then, with a deep breath, he continued, "The curse, it's not completely gone. There's a part of me that still feels the pull of it, even now. The wolf inside me still yearns to be set free when the moon is high. It doesn't go away entirely, no matter how much I wish it would. But, as long as we're together, as long as you stand by me, I can keep it at bay. Together, we can keep the darkness from controlling us." Cinderella's heart ached at his confession, but she didn't step back. She placed her hand on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her fingers. "We can face it together," she said softly, her voice firm. "The curse might still linger, but it doesn't define you. And it doesn't define us. We'll find a way to keep it in check. I believe in you, Alaric." He pulled her into an embrace, and they held each other tightly, the night surrounding them like a protective veil. There, in the stillness of the forest, they knew they had found something rare, something worth fighting for. The next day, they ventured into the village, together for the first time, not as a servant and a prince, but as two souls who had found each other amidst the shadows. They walked through the market, holding hands, their connection evident to everyone who saw them. The villagers whispered among themselves, intrigued by the presence of the mysterious young woman and the once cursed man who walked by her side. But there were whispers of another kind, rumors of the prince's search for his lost love. Cinderella could feel the tension rising, but she didn't care. What mattered was that she had chosen her path. That evening, as the moon began to rise, Alaric turned to Cinderella with a smile. "You'll always have a place here, in this world. If ever you need to leave the village or the kingdom behind, you'll always be welcome in my heart." Cinderella smiled back, her eyes twinkling. "I won't need to leave. This is my place, right here with you." As the night deepened, they returned to their forest home, where the sound of the wind in the trees was a gentle lullaby. In the quiet, under the same moon that had once bound them, they found peace. Alaric's transformation would come again, but this time, it wouldn't frighten her. She would stand by him, through the highs and lows, and together, they would face the darkness. And so, Cinderella and Alaric lived not in the shadow of a curse, but in the light of their own love, a love that had broken barriers, conquered fears, and led them to a future where they could be truly free. They had made their own destiny, a new beginning far away from the constraints of royalty or curses. It was a life built on trust, courage, and love. And it was just the beginning.